Hello class! Today I'm going to be giving you a quick overview of our latest reading assignment. We're going to go over a little information about the author, plot, characters, some themes, and the title. So this is His Name Isn't Frankenstein and Other Lessons from Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The novel we're reading is Frankenstein, sometimes known as the modern Prometheus, and we'll get into why it's called that a little later. It was written by Mary Shelley, and as a lot of you might already know, the story came about in a pretty interesting way. Shelley was spending the summer with her family at the poet Lord Byron's house. The group staying at his house got bored, and Lord Byron challenged everyone to come up with the ghost story. And Frankenstein is the byproduct of that challenge. Shelley wrote it first as a short story, and then, with Lord Byron's encouragement, turned it into a full-length novel, which was published anonymously in 1818 and published with her name in 1823. Frankenstein depicts the downfall of an ambitious young scientist, Victor Frankenstein, as he creates a human-like monster by reanimating pieces of human corpses. The work draws from Romantic as well as Gothic elements of literature. 200 years after its publication, the novel still grips the minds of readers around the world. The story begins from the perspective of Captain Robert Walton, an ambitious captain on a quest for scientific discovery, but more importantly, glory. He is writing a letter to his sister detailing how he found a young scientist named Victor Frankenstein chasing an unknown creature through the North Pole. The story then shifts to Victor's perspective as he recounts how he ended up there. Victor, once a curious, promising scientist, discovered how to reanimate corpses after the death of his mother. However, his first creation was so grotesque that he abandoned it out of sheer disgust, which ends up being the biggest mistake of his life. Rejected and abandoned, the monster went on a killing spree, with the goal of making Victor feel as tormented and isolated as he felt. After losing his entire family to the monster's wrath, Victor makes a vow to get revenge on the monster, which is what led him to the North Pole. He warns Walton to be careful as he pursues knowledge and glory. Later, after parting ways with Victor, Walton discovers the monster grieving over Victor's dead body, having finally fulfilled his ultimate revenge on his creator. A little about the characters. First, we have Victor Frankenstein, the intelligent, ambitious scientist who discovers the consequences of the pursuit of knowledge after reanimating a corpse. Then we have Frankenstein's monster, not to be confused with Frankenstein. If there's anything to take away from this, it's that they are not the same. Abandoned by Victor, the monster transforms from gentle to vengeful, and his goal shifts from companionship to revenge. Then we have Elizabeth Lavonsla, one of the few female characters in the novel, and we'll cover why that's a little interesting later. She's Victor's adopted sister-turned-bride who falls victim to the wrath of Frankenstein's monster. Lastly, we have Robert Walton. With the same curiosity, intelligence, and ambition as Victor, Captain Walton serves as Victor's foil because he, unlike Victor, stops his quest before it's too late. So a little about the setting now. The narrator travels from Geneva, Ingolstadt, France, the mountains of the Alps, and the North Pole. Throughout each setting, the element of the natural world exists. Regardless of the setting, the characters constantly note nature and the weather's effects on them. And this reflects the romantic element of the natural world. As I mentioned before, the novel was written during the Romantic period of literature, with a few Gothic influences as well. When I say romantic, I don't mean like lovey-dovey romance. Romanticism was about reflecting on nature and the grandness of the outdoors. And that's why so many of the scenes in the novel take great care to describe nature in a grand way, in a magnificent way, and they marvel at the beauty of nature. And it's in a sense used to highlight the smallness of man in comparison with the world around him. So for stylistic devices, one of them is point of view. Using multiple perspectives as a framing device allows the reader to empathize with each character, understand their motivations, and draw parallels between the different narrators. We get the story first from Captain Walton's perspective, and then we shift to Victor's, and then to the monster's perspective. It also calls the credibility of each storyteller into question as each one recounts their experiences, some of which are unknown to the other characters. For example, When we compare Victor's side of the story in comparison to the monster side, there's some great discrepancies. There's a whole section of the novel where the monster is traveling throughout the country without Victor, so there's a whole chunk that Victor doesn't know, and when they meet again, he's missed out on a huge part of the monster's experiences and doesn't understand how the monster turned into this vengeful creature. Then we have imagery. The heavy focus on the character's surroundings and nature, rather than the scientific details, reflects the spirit of the Romantic period and its emphasis on the natural world. We've covered this a little bit. So, for example, the way Mary Shelley glosses over the actual creation of the monster. Instead, during the scene where Victor's actually reanimating the dead, instead of going over the very technical scientific aspects of that process, she talks about the storm outside, the lightning and the thunder, and once again it shifts the focus from man to nature and highlights the insignificance of man in comparison to the natural world, the smallest of man, especially when the humans in the story are trying so hard to be bigger than themselves. And we'll get to that a little later too, the idea of playing God. In a story where so many of the characters are attempting to play God and be greater than their humanity, these comparisons, or the contrast of them with the natural world, kind of shows that they're not able to fully do that. It shows their insignificance in the face of the grandness of nature. So the significance of the title. The title Frankenstein has been misconstrued over the years to refer to the nameless monster instead of Victor Frankenstein, the creator of the monster. Although readers know that Frankenstein is supposed to refer to Victor, enough dissonance has formed since the novel's original publication to blur the line between creator and monster, and that ambiguity causes us to ask ourselves, who is the true monster? Some symbols and motifs. This is where we picked up a little about this earlier when we were talking about Elizabeth Labanza. So women are one of the motifs in the novel. In their obsessive pursuit of knowledge, the men of Frankenstein destroy the women in their lives. Victor's mother, Elizabeth, Justine, and the female monster make rare appearances throughout the novel, where they're portrayed as quiet and submissive. Their deaths make a greater impact than their actions when they're actually alive. These female characters now offer a platform for modern feminist critique of the novel. In 2018, we analyze why the women are placed in such a subordinate role and what it says about the nature of man, not the nature of mankind, but the nature of men specifically, that they are the ones who kind of brought upon this havoc in their lives. Another one is fire. The recurring mention of fire serves as an allusion to Prometheus, a character from Greek mythology who lived in eternal suffering as punishment for stealing fire from the gods. He stole fire, and as a result, I believe they made him, he was condemned to have birds pick at his intestines for all eternity. So that's awful. Frankenstein, sometimes known as the modern Prometheus, mimics this in the way that Victor experiences pain after playing God, in a sense, by going against the natural order and bringing the dead back to life. Fire, like knowledge, illuminates and destroys, which is one of the biggest points in the novel. So for themes, our first one is ambition. Those who blindly chase glory without considering the consequences will bring upon their own demise. At one point, Victor says to Robert Walton, "Learn from me, if not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier that man is who believes his native town to be the world, than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow." Based on Victor's downfall, we see that ambition, without considering the consequences, is dangerous, and that's one of the biggest warnings of the novel, that the pursuit of knowledge without thinking about how it might hurt you and the idea of playing God is dangerous to mankind. Another theme is revenge. Man's desire for revenge is what really turns him into a monster. At one point, the monster says to Victor Frankenstein, You can blast my other passions, but revenge remains, revenge henceforth dearer than light or food. I may die, but first you, my tyrant and tormentor, shall curse the sun that gazes on your misery. The thing is, when Victor abandoned the monster, he just abandoned it because it was ugly, and not because it was evil or doing anything horrendous. He just abandoned it because it was ugly. It wasn't until he hurt the monster in that way that the monster wanted to seek revenge on him. And once that happened, that's when the monster really turned into a monster. That's when he started committing murder and made it his goal to torment Victor. That's when he became malicious and a true monster. And the same goes for Victor as well. He was a pretty normal guy, kind of, a little kind of weird with his reanimation, but he wasn't a monster until he wanted to get revenge on who he calls the monster, but his creation. That is what truly turned him into a dangerous monster. And the question I leave you with to think about until tomorrow's class is, who is the real monster of Frankenstein? And I want you to be able to defend your answer based on the plot of the novel and consider the characters, and as well as consider some of those themes, ambition and revenge in particular. There's some other ones that you'll notice throughout, but really pay attention to those two to determine who do you think is the real monster of Frankenstein. All right, thank you guys, and I will see you in class tomorrow. Have a great night.